Most pieces of vintage gear have fascinating stories to tell. I came across another hidden gem that is no exception. (1965) Ampeg Reverb Rocket R12R, one of the most revered guitar combos. When it comes to lead guitar amplification, historic brands like Fender, Marshall, and Vox unquestionably dominate the market and the imagery of players. Yet in the past decades, the Ampeg brand had an equally important role. It was one of the most successful amplifier manufacturers of the United States. Ampeg was a direct competitor for Fender. While Fender amplifiers were most popular on the West Coast, Ampeg amps were a staple in recording studios and music venues of the East Coast. Boasting an original design with strong personality, Ampeg amplifiers have always been regarded for their sturdy construction and great sound. In the mid-1940s, the pianist and bassist Everett Hall, from the Chicago jazz scene, was looking for a solution to amplify his double bass with improved clarity. He came up with an idea that today may appear pretty straightforward. He took off the peg or end pin out of his upright bass, mounted the microphone on its end, and then put it back into the bass. In February 1946, Hall filed a patent application for this device. He used to call his invention amplified peg, until his wife suggested the contraction Ampeg. 3 years later, Everett Hall launched in New York City the Ampeg Bass Amp Company. The effective catchphrase was "the answer to bassman's prayers." I have to say that I find it quite appropriate, even today when I'm impressed by a good bass tone at a live show. Very often I see an Ampeg amp at the back of the bass player. The company set a new standard in amplification. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Ampeg introduced the world's first real monster amplifiers to fit the big stages of stadiums and larger music venues, as pioneered by the Rolling Stones. My dear friend Bacco from Pescara kindly lended me his awesome vintage original 1965 Ampeg Reverb Rocket R12R. It just underwent a full technical revision, as it is required for any old amp. Bacco gives us the chance to get acquainted with one of the most historically relevant guitar combo amplifiers. We're about to follow its evolution through the years. In the past episodes, I mentioned that to fully understand vintage amplifiers, we have to figure out how they were originally intended. The manufacturers of the time aimed to make amplifiers that kept sounding clean at loud volume levels. Their goal was clarity and headroom as opposed to early breakup and saturation. In fact, we have to bear in mind that distorted tone was still strictly considered an annoying problem, even in guitar amplification. This was especially true for Ampeg founder Everett Hall. He was culturally and geographically close to the New York jazz scene of the day. Hall disliked rock and roll. He believed that the clean tone of jazz stood a class above, and really felt that distortion was not an option. Therefore, Ampeg guitar amps were committed by vocation to clean tone. The Ampeg vice president, the outstanding design engineer Jess Oliver, made an effort into developing amplifiers that had remarkable depth and clarity with minimum flab or mark. In this scenario, there was an exception: the combo amplifiers of the Universal series, introduced in January 1957. The Universal series consisted of two budget models, the Mercury and the Rocket, named after the space race craze of the time. In January 1958, Ampeg also introduced the Jet, an even more basic model for those who could not afford to fly to outer space. The Rocket, labeled R12, had an output power of about 12 watts and featured three inputs, one for microphone, one for guitar, and one for accordion, a popular dance band instrument of the time. The amplifiers of the Universal series became widely popular, remaining in catalog until 1970. They were all based on the same formula. All three models featured a single tone control and a cabinet with single 12 inches Jensen Concert Series speaker. They all featured an output stage producing no more than 15 watts of power from a pair of 6v6 power tubes with a 5Y3 rectifier. The preamp section used a set of old-style octal-based tubes. These features, and the tube complement, were very similar to most low-wattage amps of the era, including the mid-50s Tweed Fender Deluxe. Even though the Universal series was proudly advertised as being amazingly free of distortion, these amps can definitely show some Fender Tweed attitude. In fact, they can sound aggressive when pushed to higher volume levels to the liking of blues rock musicians. The technical specifications of the Ampeg amps were never really consistent. The design during the 1950s and 60s underwent frequent and significant updates, both cosmetically and functionally. In mid-1958, shortly after the introduction of the Jet, the old-fashioned look with tree bark covering and pinky grill cloth gave way to silver grill with fancy abstract swirls and navy random flare covering, a deep blue vinyl covering with silver sparkles. A logo restyling and a more sober grey cloth followed in 1960. A way more important technical innovation arrived in 1961. Jess Oliver developed a circuit for the new Hammond Spring Reverb Pan and built it into a Rocket amplifier. The Rocket with reverb was given a distinct model name, which, unsurprisingly, was Reverb Rocket R12R. This new model was presented in July at the Summer NAMM show in Chicago. It is credited as the first guitar amplifier with integrated reverb. As we've seen in BTR number 39, Leo Fender opted for a standalone unit. He didn't release his first amplifier with reverb until 1 year and a half later, when he launched the Vibroverb. Many players indicate Fender Blackface amps as archetype of classic tube-driven spring reverb sound. On the contrary, a lot of experts agree that Ampeg should be recognized for the most impressive sounding onboard spring reverb of the 1960s. It sounds lush and thick, to the point that the control panel sports the inflated label Echo with bombastic dimension knob. Ampeg reverb sounds actually a lot deeper and impressive than a typical Fender reverb. On the other hand, I should reckon that the more subtle sounding Fender reverb could be more functional to the overall band sound in certain situations. In 1962, another important change arrived. Ampeg moved to a new factory building in Linden, New Jersey. The new plant was 3 times the size of the old one, which allowed for an increase in production. Around the same period, the amplifiers changed dress again. The Navy random flare covering gives way to the now iconic Blue Diamond checkerboard Tolex vinyl. My dear friend Dario Mattoni of Mr. Bricks and the Rubble is helping us to check out the tones of this 1965 Ampeg Reverb Rocket R12R. By the demanding standards of Ampeg, the Reverb Rocket could still use a cleaner tone and more power. In the course of 1963, the tube complement was revised. The 6V6 GT power tubes were swapped to 7591 type, typically used in FI systems of the time. In the Ampeg circuit, these tubes were operated way below their rated tolerance, and therefore produced increased headroom, which pleased jazz guitarists, their biggest clients and endorsers. This updated version of the Reverb Rocket with 7591 tubes was designated by the identifying code R12RA. Everett Hall and Jess Oliver went on with their research for cleaner tone. By early 1964, the R12RB switched from tube rectification to diode rectifier. The solid-state rectifier further increased definition and output power, which now reached 20 watts. It should be noted that the final letter in the identifying codes didn't have a linear sequence. In fact, later in 1964, we jumped to the model R12RM. This further update of the circuit dropped the old preamp tubes with 8-pin base or octal socket and adopted the new glass miniature tubes, the now common 12IX7 and 12IU7 with 9-pin base or novel socket. In early 1965, we arrived to the Reverb Rocket R12RT, which we have here. This version presents one more significant change. It adopts a new couple of power tubes. They mount 7868 type in place of the 7591. Electronically, these two tube types are substantially identical, with a different pin base. The remote foot switch changed the wedge's material from wood to plastic. Also, in early 1965, the serial number system was changed to a plain sequence of 6-digit numbers starting at 1 preceded by 5 zeros. This system was adopted for about 5 years. 1965 serials arrived to 020,000. Our Reverb Rocket has serial number 003109, so it was manufactured in the first part of that year. The R12RT is the last version with the old-style top panel cabinet. It preceded of only a few months the release of the Reverb Rocket 2nd, with front-mounted control panel and separate bass and treble controls. Early in 1967, Ampeg changed the Blue Diamond Tolex to a more common black covering. The transition to black covering marks two important events: the switch from the more desirable point-to-point construction to the printed circuit boards, and the demise of the original company, which was sold to Unimusic. Many other owners followed through the years. For more detailed information, check the book Ampeg, The Story Behind the Sound by Greg Hopkins and Bill Moore. The Reverb Rocket model was discontinued in 1970. A few reissues were released off and on starting from the 1990s. In particular, the current owner, Yamaha Guitar Group, tried to revive the original model in 2012 when they released a limited run of 100 hand-wired amps named Heritage R12R Reverb Rocket, assembled in the USA after a closer interpretation of the original design. They paradoxically costed way more than the originals. Recording high-quality vintage gear in a satisfactory way means capturing the nuances of their tone. Brenga's Lab Custom Microphones, based in Rome, has accepted this challenge and came to our help. I'm using the Ferro model, which is a JFET large diaphragm condenser studio microphone with an output transformer. The Brenga's Ferro is sided by a vintage Sennheiser MD407 to add some grit on the high end. The amp sounds lively, with healthy headroom and creamy, clean tones. If you crank up the volume, it breaks up with nice mid-range bark. The single-tone knob provides unexpected versatility. Maybe there's only a bit of sizzle in the high end when fully open. The accordion channel offers a darker, smoother voice that could be useful for acoustic playing, harmonica, analog keyboards, and even accordion. Great quality of sound with excellent reverb and bias modulating tremolo make the Reverb Rocket a perfect studio workhorse. It also has plenty of volume for gigging in small clubs. Some players favor the older versions with the Octal 6SL7 tubes, considered a little fatter and smoother than 12IX7. Unfortunately, finding these discontinued tubes can be difficult. 7591 and 7868 power tubes have also been discontinued for years, but fortunately they are back in production with an acceptable approximation to the originals. Bottom line, the Reverb Rocket boasts excellent build quality, from the neat wiring of the circuit with premium components to solid wood cabinet with finger-joined corners and plywood baffle. In today's awkward market of vintage gear, the original R12R has been simply defined the most undervalued amplifier, an excellent and cheaper alternative to the valuable Fender Deluxe. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to keep in touch. Feel free to join the Facebook group Bob Stone Review and visit our Instagram profile. Your feedback and comments are the only fuel to keep the BTR channel going.